Did you stumble across some parents or crouching to in a lightning warp tornado shot build? You watched it and it seemed so cool. You start searching on the web for guides on the build, but then there's no guides. Multiple mirrors, sub 1 million arrow DPS, no explanation of the actual build mechanics. Saw a shady 5,000 word essay explaining the build. You decided to try it out yourself. You need to make a new character and restart a new build, knowing damn well it's gonna get nerfed next league. But it's just a wish version of the build, literally, just as slow as your other builds. Well then worry not, as I, Mkishi, decided to make a guide on how to play the Lightning Warp Tornado Shot with a little twist. My guide will have Omniscience. You heard that right. No need to change your build, friend. All you need is to swap 2 or 3 items, change around 7 passive point, and boom! You got yourself the build. Hey guys, Mkishi here. Today we're going to talk about the part 1 of our Lightning Warp Omniscience Tornado Shot build journey. With the rising popularity of the Lightning Warp Tornado Shot build, I have decided to as well talk about it. I've tried to search on the internet guides on how to make the Lightning Warp Tornado Shot, and I have found absolutely nothing. And that was quite frustrating because I know a lot of players want to, try out that build. In our Discord, there was a ton of questions towards that, so I've decided to make a video explaining how the build functions. Alright, so it's important to note that this video is going to be an explanation of the build, right? So the mechanics. It will not be a 100% build guide where I show every single item, but it will construct on top of a Omniscience character, right? Because my little spice, as I said in the intro, is I've kept Omniscience. Now, I've decided to make the Omniscience variant so that most players can transition without selling their build and with minimum additional investment, right? Because most of bow build players and pretty much most of my, followers, they play Omniscience builds, right? So I wouldn't want to make another build completely where they have to make a new character or having to sell their other builds just to be able to play the Lightning Warp. Also, this means that the entry cost is way lower. It's many mirrors. I like every single player that plays the build always tell it's like multiple mirrors to get into. With Omniscience, it's quite fairly cheap if you have good gear, right? If you're really on a very like a big budget, a small budget, sorry, I don't suggest it, especially if you're a noob, okay? Even if you have a good budget, if you don't know really how to play Path of Exile that well, I don't really suggest the build, but it's a lot of fun if you want to try it out, right? I might make a min-maxed Badge of the Brotherhood variant, and I'm thinking of making a budget version for like it's obviously not going to be budget for everybody, but for the build archetype, it's going to be a very small budget. Alright, so let's get into the actual video. In the video, we're going to be discussing what is Lightning Warp Tornado Shot build, what are my thoughts on it, the explanation of the Lightning Warp mechanic, which is unbelievably important, my own spice to the build, Omniscience, and then how to use POB, which is going to be mandatory for this build. Alright, so first off, what the hell is Lightning Warp Tornado Shot? Well, Tornado Shot is going to be the main attack of our build, so it's going to be pretty much a normal Tornado Shot build, but the difference is every time you will shoot with Tornado Shot, it will trigger a movement skill called Lightning Warp. This skill will teleport us every time we attack where we fire our arrows. So if you put your mouse cursor somewhere on the screen, you shoot, your Tornado Shot are going to shoot, they're going to blow up at that specific spot, and you're going to be teleported to that exact spot. This is important to know because we need to make sure in our build that you kill the monsters, or most of them, in one shot, as you will teleport to their bodies. And if they're not dead, bunk, and you might die, right? Now, obviously, we're going to have to make the build slightly tankier than usual, or extremely high DPS. If done correctly, this is the quickest build in the present meta. I'm not knowledgeable in heist runners because I know they get like 1,000 movement speed or something, so I don't know in a straight line who goes faster, but in terms of actual meta and like mapping and stuff, this is the quickest build. It goes unbelievably fast. I don't know the history of the build, but it seems to have been my Leave Knock and Captain Garbage. I don't know if it was only one of them or both of them. I think Captain Garbage gave his build to Crouching Tuna and made it popular. And Leave Knock, I saw one of his video in like 3.17, so he's pretty OG in those terms, but I don't know exactly who made those builds, but those are often the two names that are associated. Now, before you start playing this build, it's important to know that if you have eye problems, right, or if you have difficulty with quick movement, bright colors, and like blur, this build is not suggested, as it will strain pretty heavily your eyes if you have problems like that, especially after prolonged gameplay. Alright, so my thoughts on the build. Will it get nerfed? Absolutely. I am positive that the GGG nerfing death squad is gonna just hammer it down to the ground. I believe it will survive the league before getting nerfed, so that means the people that wish to play the build, now is the time, right? If you think, oh, I'm gonna make it next league, the odds of it surviving next league I find are pretty low. Now, in case of mid-league nerf, that I doubt it will happen, but if it does happen, what's great is you're going to be using my Omniscience version, which means that it will minimize your loss and all you have to do is swap 2-3 items and then a few passive points and you're back to a normal Omniscience build. Now, is it worth it as a build, right? This depends on many factors. If you want the Badge of the Brotherhood version, for the cost and effectiveness, I think it's a big meh, okay? It's unbelievably expensive to get into. The DPS is not that much. It's very hard to control, which means half the maps are like literally unplayable. Or if you teleport a bit slower, there's no purpose, right? Or just you could also just get a quicker character. So in terms of like quick teleportation, half the maps become unplayable. You're not going to be able to really boss, right? You can boss rush, but example, if you want to do like Ubers and stuff like that, I kind of doubt. And it kind of hurts the eyes and the head if you play too much. But if you have enough DPS, right, you'll never map as quickly. It's the coolest mapping experience ever. It's unbelievably fast. And if you want to do boss rushing with specific maps and you know the layout, it's instantaneous. You literally teleport the whole map in not even a second. So it's very good. I think that's why I wanted to make the Omniscience version, because the entry cost is very low. And if you're tired of teleporting everywhere, all you have to do is just like swap a few things, play Omniscience. You want to have fun, you go back to it. And yeah, so I think Omniscience would be worth it, but the Badge of the Brotherhood for the cost, totally not. Oops, sorry. Alright, so Lightning Warp, how does it work? Well, there's many requirements needed to make the Lightning Warp work. As some of you have tried, socketing Lightning Warp won't make the build as quick and cool as the build showcases, and so the factors that are going to be influencing Lightning Warp, there's going to be Lightning Warp cast speed and trigger, there's Lightning Warp duration, Lightning Warp cooldown recovery, as well as the Tornado Shot attack speed. Alright, so explaining the basics. What is attack speed and cast speed? Attack speed is a keyword and refers to attacks that could be performed at a time in 1 second, shown by animated actions with weapons. Attack speed does not increase the rate at which spell can be cast. Alright, I know a lot of people, they think the animation of you like moving your wand or something is attack speed. It is not. Instead, it's going to be cast speed for that purpose. Attack speed is unbelievably important for Tornado Shot, so it's important that we have a specific attack speed for our Tornado Shot, and that will be discussed later in the video. For your cast speed is a keyword and refers to the speed of using skills, which are spells, and is calculated as uses per second. So it's attack speed, but with spells. The thing is, cast speed is not important because we trigger Lightning Warp instead of casting it, which means you do not have to spec a single point into cast speed. Now, what is trigger? Trigger effects causes a skill to activate instantly when a specified condition is met without requiring an animation. They have slightly different behaviors depending on whether they are a skill gem or linked to trigger supports. Modifiers on items and support gems that trigger a skill have a percentage-based cost and reservation multiplier. This essentially means that trigger skills still require sufficient resources to activate, unless stated otherwise. This just means you're going to need mana, right? What's great about that is if it requires no animation, we do not need to stop our attack to then cast a spell, saving us a ton of time. In a world where it was the case, let's say we attacked every 0.1 second, and that the cast was as well 0.1 second. So if it wasn't a trigger, right, we would need 0.2 seconds to attack and teleport instead of simply attacking at 0.1 and instantly teleporting. And so yeah, that's why triggering is very, very good. This just means we simply need to make sure to have enough mana. And with our build, we're just going to make sure that our lightning warp costs 0. Alright, skill duration. Skill duration and why we want it to be lowered. Well, the duration is a keyword that refers to the attribute of a certain effect that continues over time and specifies how long the effect remains. Because we want to effectively teleport to a certain place on the map, the lower the duration of lightning warp, the quicker we can teleport to that area once the skill is cast. If we get it to 0, so basically 100% reduced, we will basically teleport instantly. And to reach that maximum speed, well, as I said, you need to make sure that your skill reduced duration, you get a 100% reduced duration speed to make the lightning warp duration non-existent and therefore actually teleporting us. Cooldown recovery. Cooldown recovery, or CDR, is a keyword, cooldown, is a keyword, and it means an interval to the next use and is counted in seconds. The next use can be performed after cooldown time passes, except when there are stored uses. For example, a Flame Dash has 3 stored uses, but there's still a cooldown, right, to get them back to 3. We will try to get our cooldown recovery high so that the cooldown of Lightning Warp is lower, which means we can use it more often per second, making us faster but also smoother. Think about it like frames per second, right? If your monitor has 10 frames per second, it's gonna feel chopped, right? But if you have 60 frames per second, it's gonna be smooth, right? Because you'll be teleporting very quickly and it won't like be chunks of you teleporting. It's gonna be smooth sailing. And it will be quicker, right? Because the quicker we can teleport, the bigger distance we can travel in a second. Now, cooldown recovery. This part is going to be very important that you guys listen, okay? Because if this isn't done well, the build is completely bricked, okay? So listen up. And just before I get into this is my understanding of things, and I've dumbed it down a bit for guide purposes, right? So if there's like small mistakes, you can always let me know, but just please don't attack me saying like I don't know how to do math and stuff. I mean, I just read about that like 2 days ago, to make sure that you guys have like the best explanation possible. But yeah. So we will proceed to explain how it works, right? But if you're like not interested or you already know what to do, although I do not suggest you skip it, there's going to be 2 breakthroughs that we want to get, right? We want a 135 cooldown recovery, which gives us a 7.58 trigger rate cap. And that's going to be what we aim for with Omniscience. And if you use Badge of the Brotherhood, you're going to want 204% cooldown recovery, which gives us a 10.1 trigger rate cap. Now, it's important to know that we want our attack speed to be as close as possible, if not below, okay, but never above, to our trigger rate cap. We must not forget to have our configuration on, right? If you use Gale Force, Frenzy Charges, if you gain Rage, you're gonna have to add that to your configuration, and that will give you your final attack speed. Alright, tick rate and trigger rate. We want the number of times Lightning Warp is triggered to be the highest possible, but we are limited by our cooldown recovery as well as the server tick rate, and that's a very important factor. So what is a server tick rate? There's an internal server tick rate that limits how fast cooldown of spells can be processed, okay? Servers do not calculate the game in real time. They actually divide it in small chunks and they calculate it at once, okay? And one of those chunks, like the server chunks that are divided, are called ticks. And a single tick has a duration of 33 milliseconds, which is 0.033 seconds. The status of cooldown is only updated once on each server tick. So your cooldown basically go down by 33 milliseconds, right? And due to the limitation of server ticks, cooldown are effectively always rounded up multiples of 33 milliseconds. That means if your cooldown is 50 millisecond, it will be rounded to the second tick, which is 66, right? Because first tick is 33, second one is 66. You're at 50, you go up to 66, right? This means that no matter what, if your trigger speed is 34 milliseconds or 66 milliseconds, the trigger will be rounded to the highest server tick, therefore being equal. So 34 millisecond cooldown and 66 millisecond cooldowns are the same thing because they're rounded up to the second server tick. That's why you're going to need breakthrough, right? Because you want to go from that second tick to that first tick. and that's going to make a huge difference. For example, if at 66 you had a normal cooldown recovery, and at 34 you had 95% cooldown recovery, well, the difference between 0 cooldown recovery and 95% cooldown recovery is the same. But the difference between 100% cooldown recovery, which would be 33 milliseconds, is twice as fast as a 95 cooldown recovery, because you're still in the second tick on the for the last one. This means that we can only attack every 0.033 seconds, and so no matter how fast we trigger Lightning Warp, we can only trigger it once per server tick, and that's important as well. This is why there are breakthrough points, and that we need to reach a specific percentage to get there, as the trigger rate will not increase in a linear way in proportion to our cooldown recovery. It's gonna, you know, it's proportional, but it will only like increase as like steps, right? So it's gonna be flat for a while, then it's gonna go on another step. It's gonna be flat for a while, it's gonna go on another step, right? We will not be able to attack every single tick, right? 0.033 seconds per attack is absolutely nuts, right? So the goal is to attack in the less amount of ticks possible, right? So now we can say I attack every 4 ticks, or I attack every 3 ticks, right? And that's going to be the breakthrough that we're going to try to reach, to attack every 3 ticks. To attack every 4 ticks. All right, so what the hell did I just say? The server is divided into chunks of 0.033 seconds. This means we can only Lightning Warp once per tick. Let's give an example where we start the server back down to 0 and you start Lightning Warping exactly at that moment. Between 0 to 0.33, first tick of the rate second, 0.033 seconds is the first tick. Between 33 milliseconds to 66 milliseconds, it's the second tick. Between 66 and 99 ticks, it's milliseconds, it's the third tick. And between 99 milliseconds and 132 milliseconds, it's the fourth tick. At 135% cooldown recovery and at 7.58 attacks per second, we attack every 131.9 milliseconds, which means that every 4 tick, we teleport. And that's what we want to get to, because most players will only be able to teleport on tick number 5 or tick number 6, and there's a huge difference. So our goal is to attack every 4 ticks. Now, trigger rate and attack speed. Attacking too slowly just makes you teleport less, right? Because, I mean, you attack less often, you teleport less often. But attacking too quickly will also have the same effect. Now, this example is not in-game example of what is going to happen, but it's just going to be an explanation on why attacking too quick is bad. The server tick rate is every 33 milliseconds. Let's say we attack 20 milliseconds every time, right? It takes us 20 milliseconds. Now, obviously, we're going to have our attack way higher, but for the example, it's going to be 20 milliseconds. On the first tick rate, so between 0 to 33, we attack once at exactly 20 milliseconds. On the second tick, right, between 33 excluding and 66 including, we attack a second time at 40, but we also attack a third time at 60. But as we know, we can only lightning warp once per tick rate, right? That means we lightning warp at 20, we lightning warp at 40, but we do not lightning warp at 60 milliseconds because we're in the same tick rate as the 40 millisecond one. This means 33% of our attack will not trigger, right? So the math is not exactly 33, but in that example, a third of your attacks will not trigger lightning warp, and that will make your warp speed way, our trigger warping speed way lower. All right, dumbing it down, guys. Because we use Asenath's Chant, we do not need to cast a spell, therefore not needing any cast speed. A normal lightning warp does not have any cooldown, but using Asenath's Chant will add a 0.3 cooldown to lightning warp. To make it easier for you guys, we can consider the cooldown as the cast speed for the next lightning warp, and then our goal will make that cooldown equal or slightly faster than our tornado shot attack, right? Basically, your cooldown is going to be your cast speed for lightning warp. Now, how the hell do you apply that to your build? First of all, your attack speed must be 7.58 or lower at your normal configuration. You must have, for normal configuration, usually for Deadeye, is going to be 10 Gale Forces. If you use Frenzy Charges, Onslaught. I do not suggest Rage, as Rage is, well, impossible to exactly point how much Rage you're going to have per map. But for example, if you use for whatever reason you're using adrenaline or something, you could also add that to your configuration. And the total at maximum at normal configuration, your attack speed must be 7.58 or lower. Cast speed, completely unnecessary. For your duration, as we said, our goal is to get the duration to reduced 100. And there's a ton of ways to do that. There's the enchant right here, as you can see, 30% reduced lightning warp duration. So that's already 30%. On your gem, the lightning warp gem, if you use a level 20, 23% quality lightning warp phantasmal, you have 60% reduced duration. If you use a normal level 20 lightning warp, it's 49, right? If you use the impossible escape with the mage bane radius, you can choose these 3 nodes, which will give you an additional 25. You could also socket gems such as less duration support, which is 60%, 25% swift affliction. So you don't have to do all of that. Just make sure the total ends up 100%. Now, if you're able to and if you have the budget, do not put the gems. So try to do it without the gems, because if you start putting gems, you're gonna because on tornado shot builds we're pretty tight in our gems. And so if you start adding extra gems and stuff, it might be complicated, to fit all your auras and all your like sniper's mark and stuff. So try to do that. But if you're on a budget, less duration is pretty easy to get. All right. Now, the cooldown recovery of 135% is the breakpoint we want to achieve at a 7.58 max trigger rate. So how do I achieve that? 45% will come from your tree. The fleet foot here will give you 30, and the adjacent one right here will give you 15. I don't know why this got bugged, but yeah, this one and this one. Now, if 40% and additional 40% and up to 50 to 55, if it's Crusader or Shaper influence on Nightwing, Dream Quest, or Dust Walker Slippers. So these slippers with their implicits, and if you have a Crusader or Shaper influence, you can make it up to 50%. If you don't want to craft it, I don't know the price of those things, they might blow up after this video. You can always have between 50 to 80% with the Stampede unique boots right here, and you could get between 30 to 50% cooldown recovery with the Haste Watcher's Eye cooldown recovery. Now, the breakpoint is quite easy to hit, okay? Even on a budget, all you need to do is get that 135%, and you don't really have to change the rest of your build. Oh, I forgot to say as well, if you have a like perfectly rolled Watcher's Eye, and you're quite close to getting that 135, and you don't want to change your boots, there's also a implicit of Eater of World, which could go up to 32% cooldown recovery. So just make sure you have 135. It could be a bit more, right? We don't really care, but after that you don't need more. But just make sure it's 135 or more, not 1% less. All right. Now, POB is going to be your friend for this, okay? You will need POB to see your trigger rate, attack speed, and cooldown recovery, and other useful info, okay? POB is mandatory for this build, so if you've been downloading POB for whatever reason, you're going to have to download it for this build. So first of all, you're going to have to import your character, go in your configuration menu, and make sure to configure your build in a normal mapping condition, right? Make sure your build has only controllable variables. So if your build has rage, take off that rage stuff, okay? Because you cannot control rage. But you can control the number of frenzy charges, right? Which is often going to be capped. Your guild force is pretty much always going to be 10. You're going to have, if you have onslaught, you add onslaught. If you have flask effect, add your flask effect. So just make sure you have your configuration in a normal map, and then you'll be able to do the rest. All right, now making sure everything is right. What you have to do first is go into your skill section, right click on the lightning warp to set it as active skill, right? And make sure it is the first skill on the list, all right? Sometimes if you have lightning warp in the bottom here, for whatever reason, POB is going to make the active skill, even if it says lightning warp, it's going to, like the information that you're going to see is going to be on like less duration or something. For whatever reason, I don't know. Example, if you have a herald, it might go on your herald instead of lightning warp. So make sure lightning warp is the top one to avoid POB confusion. And here you're going to see your effective trigger rate. If you have the 135, the maximum you can go is 7.58, and that's the goal you're going to reach. You don't need exactly 7.58, okay? If you have 7.5, it's good. If you have 7.35, it's good, all right? Just get the highest thing you're able to do. Now, it's important to note, if you have a slower attack speed than 7.58, you need to increase your attack speed. If your attack speed is above 7.58 and your trigger rate is low, you're going to have to lower your attack speed. Now, you're going to have to go after that in the calculation section and select lightning warp. So click here, socketed group, lightning warp. And then below in the menu, you will see the maximum trigger rate. Your maximum trigger rate is supposed to be 7.58. If you're below 135, I think it's going to show 6.08 or something like that. If you are not at 7.58, our very nice POB will tell you how much CDR is needed for your next breakthrough. Now, I need 34% to get to the 10.1, right? For example, if you guys don't have 7.58, it's going to tell you exactly extra increased cooldown recovery of 34% to reach next break point, right? And that's after that, they just show you how to calculate the trigger rate, which is 1 divided by the 4 ticks, okay? And here, effective source rate, which is the number of attacks, effective source rate is your actual triggering rate with lightning warp and tornado shot, right? The trigger rate cap is not what the speed you're going to the effective source rate and skill trigger rate. So if your source rate is at 6, you're gonna lightning warp 6 times instead of 7.58. All right, my spice on the build, Omniscience. So why going Omniscience? Well, first of all, Omniscience is the highest DPS type of build variant for bow, okay? Most players and most viewers are going to have Omniscience build, and going Lightning Warp would mean changing your whole build because Omniscience is a build enabler, right? Without Omniscience, your build doesn't function. Their whole build is built around Omniscience, right? Because you don't have any damage release sources except Omniscience and physical scaling. You have no elemental resistance without Omniscience, right? So dropping Omniscience for Badge of the Brotherhood, which is also an amulet, will mean that you have to change completely your build. I decided to go Omniscience because it will make the transition actually cheap. I think I spent 5 to 6 divines, right? 5 to 6 divine to transition to Lightning Warp and keeping Omniscience. And if you're tired of playing that build, or if you don't like it, you can always just swap back with the items you already have. Now, the thing is, going Omniscience will stop us from going to 204% cooldown recovery and a 10.1 trigger rate. But because we will not be going in a straight line for a long time, most of the time, there will literally be no difference, okay? The notable difference is very low. And because, you know, you're going to have to shoot stuff, turn, you're going to be in maps, you're going to smash into walls. I'm telling you, it's going to take a bit of a while before getting used to it. The difference between 10.1 and 7.58 is not that big. So there's basically no downsides of going Omniscience. All right. The build guide for a normal Omniscience with a budget option, right? I'm going to have a normal Omniscience and a budget option in a video. We'll have a separate video, as I said. But if you have a good build already, just, you know, follow this guide and you'll be able to transition very, very, very easily. Okay? Things to note. When transitioning, use Anomalous Inspiration to make Lightning Warp 0 mana. If you have, you know, the Mage Blood with the 25% reduced cost of mana skills, you can make it to 0, which is pretty much mandatory because we're very tight in mana. And if you have Tornado Shot, Lightning Warp, and Sniper's Mark that trigger 7.58 times per second, you're going to be using a lot of mana, right? But this build is actually doable without Mage Blood. Like, I took off my Mage Blood and I was able to run it with the exact same trigger rate. Just make sure, example, if you have attack speed on Flask to, you know, get that attack speed back, but totally can do it without Mage Blood. The only thing you're going to need is going to be enough mana to sustain and enough mana regeneration to sustain, you know, for the cost of Tornado Shot, Lightning Warp, and Sniper's Mark. That's it. So if you don't have Mage Blood, this is still doable. Don't lose all hope. I will be making a budget version without Mage Blood, and I'm going to try a budget version also as well without Omniscience. So both without Mage Blood and Omniscience. All right, build tips. Most of the tree is going to remain unchanged. The only thing you're going to get is Fleetfoot and maybe the Impossible Escape if you go down that road. Change your helmet for Asenath's Mark and change your boots, right? It might change your boots or just change the implicits, depends. Get a cooldown recovery haste Watcher's Eye and try to get one that resembles the most your build, right? If you had 3 mods, one was raw crit and attack speed and, I don't know, elemental penetration, replace one of them with the cooldown recovery or try to find someone that... Try to find a Watcher's Eye that resembles the most your build, right? So you don't have to change that much. Now, it's important to note that for this build, you're gonna have to use haste, which means you're gonna have to take maybe 1 or 2 auras off or get, you know, a bit more mana reservation efficiency. to get that haste going, okay? Vile Haste will not make it work. Make sure to lower the mana cost of your skill. Tornado Shot to 1 mana, Lightning Warp to 0. And if mapping, you can keep your Ascendancy, right? But if you're boss rushing and you don't have a lot of DPS, right? If you don't have a lot of DPS, you can drop Far Shot and go for point blank, you know? But if you have enough DPS, you can just shoot like on a wall or something, and it's gonna chain off walls and stuff. It's gonna kill the boss, right? But if you really have problem and you have to teleport on the face of the boss, make sure to take off Far Shot and go for, you know, point blank. When you're playing, I suggest you bind all 3 keys, or at least 2 keys for that build, and always hold them. I don't know why, but I have the impression it's a ton smoother, right? Because sometimes when you only hold a single key, it's gonna stop teleporting for whatever reason. So if you hold many keys at the same time, because it triggers so quickly, well, that will make that you have like a 100% uptime with your Lightning Warp and Tornado Shot shooting. All right, guys. So that's the end of the video. If you are interested in this build, please let me know in the comments and drop a like. If you have any criticism or questions, you can always let me know in the comments. As I said, we have a Discord server. We have 2.5 thousand people in our Discord server. This is where you can find the rest of my POBs. You can chat with me, with my other helpers. We also are going to set up a shop for Tornado Shot builds, right? So if you want to buy items that are crafted by me or specific players that I've chosen, you can go join the Discord server for that. And yeah, so hopefully you liked the video. If you try out the build, I wish you luck. And most importantly, have fun, guys.